Something happened in the past few weeks that should make us all stop and pay attention. Israel's security doctrine, the walls, the buffer zones, the deterrence architecture, all of it is being tested at the same time in Syria, in Lebanon, Gaza, and with Iran. The old playbook, it seems, is not holding the way it used to. And we can feel the uncertainty in every policy room in Washington. Today, I'm joined by Brigadier General Asaf Orion, Senior Researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies and Director at the Diane and Guilford Glazer Israel-China Policy Center. He served more than 3 decades in Israel Defense Forces, heading the strategic division, navigating with UN peacekeepers and neighboring militaries. We have reached a moment where Israel's next move in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and alliances are going to shape the region for years. Let's begin with a question that goes right to the heart of your experience. Israel has, for decades, relied on buffer zones, military occupation, and walls as its security strategy. The question is simple: what does 40 years of that strategy teach us about its long-term effectiveness?
The basic buffer zone, the best buffer zone, and the most desirable one is peace with stable neighbors who are responsible and credible, and they are enforcing their sovereignty themselves, and they prevent any attack on Israel. We have two very positive experiences of that sort with Egypt and Jordan. So that would be, I would say, the gold standard of what Israel would like to achieve. And so when terror armies use population and built up areas for military purposes, attacking Israel from inside the population and inside the urban areas, like in the South Lebanon villages and in Gaza, those urban areas used for military purposes need to be destroyed.
Let's put October 7 for a little bit on the side, since you mentioned Lebanon, to understand strategically from a military point of view. In Lebanon, from 1985 to 2000, Israel occupied a security zone, but suffered losses, 256 soldiers over 15 years, and yet saw the rise of Hezbollah anyway. Now, Israel claims an indefinite presence in Syria's buffer zone and builds walls in southern Lebanon. From your view as a military strategist, why did the Lebanon security zone fall? And when we talk about buffer zone, everyone from an international standard point of view, why the buffer zone wouldn't be fortified from the country that wants to build the buffer zone, but not occupy another land from another country?
I think the crux of the matter is the question of, as I started with the gold standard, if we have a stable, reliable neighbor who insists on preventing attacks coming from its side toward Israel, that's the best result. And I worked more than a decade with my Egyptian colleagues, with my Jordanian colleagues, guarding each other's back from possible threats against both of us. When Lebanon, for its own reasons, allowed Hezbollah to grow there, to be used as a forward platform to attack Israel, that's unacceptable. And we've tried going along with the 1701, with the UNIFIL forces, with promises that the area is demilitarized, with claims that Israel is only alleging the buildup of Hezbollah, and we've seen where it went. So I think at the current stage, Israel is holding those areas, but the long-term approach would be to allow security arrangements and down the road peace arrangements.
There has been many complaints that Israel attacked UNIFIL, like forces, peacekeeping forces from the UN, build a wall inside and more of kilometers that were agreed upon. How is this today different from before? And also, we've seen the Syrian buffer zone. Is that also different, or is it the same, or mostly more the same?
With Syria in 1974, we had the disengagement arrangements after the 73 war, which dictated demilitarized or at least decreased areas of military presence to make sure that both parties don't surprise each other with attacks. That's to prevent a 73 war scenario. On December 8th last year, the Bashar al-Assad regime fell, and this arrangement finally collapsed, although it was hollowed long before because of the civil war. There were times from 2013 or so that the other side wasn't held by Damascus, but by rebels. So what Israel did last year is to seize areas which might turn into threats. But I think the end game is well known. We're talking about security arrangements reinstated and down the road peace. I think we need to differentiate between the tactics and the strategic purposes.
How do you see the peace along the run? Do you think Lebanon has the right to condemn or present complaints to the United Nations and to the world that UNIFIL have been attacked? Lebanon did not retaliate so far or launch anything from the southern side of Lebanon toward Israel since the ceasefire. Yet there are who called these provocations. Does Lebanon, you think, have the right to retaliate or respond at this point, or this is going to be seen as provocation?
I think what we need to keep our eyes on the ball. The ceasefire agreement was an equation which basically says no Hezbollah weapons, and that preferably would be achieved through Lebanese armed forces, Lebanese government action to disarm them. And Hezbollah, right from the start, said, well, maybe only on the south. I think the Lebanese armed forces had some progress in this, but recently we're hearing more resistance from the resistance and more excuses from the Lebanese armed forces. As we just saw, the commander of the Lebanese armed forces visit in Washington was canceled for some reason. To, let's say, compensate for what the Lebanese armed forces is doing and to stop Hezbollah from rebuilding, which is what they did from day one after the war, Israel is enforcing this. And of course, it's a violation of Lebanese sovereignty, but so is the Hezbollah weapons are also a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. About attacks near UNIFIL forces, I think it's regrettable. It's mostly mistakes, I understand. And the wall violating the blue line is probably also a mistake, and eventually it will be removed. I've been part of many such corrections over the years.
However, if it's going to be removed, how do you explain the fears, specifically that we hear from and we see from settlement organizations trying to promote the selling of some of the southern sides of Lebanese villages in Lebanon? How do you see that in this perspective, if the end goal, as you said, is peace?
I think this is basically trolling. and people playing with each other's minds. There's definitely not a political will, no political backing, no political support to any of these. And look, we have zealots in many places with strange ideas. I wouldn't let them kidnap the agenda and what's really on the line.
So
What's on the line is the Iranian occupation of Lebanon through Hezbollah weapons against the option of going to peace.
So can buffer zone or cannot buffer zone substitute for diplomatic resolution, or does history suggest the opposite, you think?
I think it's a combination when you basically need a buffer zone, which would best be agreed by diplomacy, but lacking diplomacy, you need to make sure that your civilians are safe and that no threats are allowed to grow on the other side because of any excuse, bringing us to what Hezbollah mentioned as his plan to conquer the Galilee, or what we've seen on October 7th.
In your paper, Israel and the Fall of Assad, you argue a buffer zone is only as good as the neighbor's state capacity. Does that apply here?
I think in Syria we're seeing an opportunity emerging because Iran lost its partner, staging front, logistical medium, and so on. And a Shah regime seemed to be committed to preventing Iran from returning. That's good news. And I think what we've seen recently with Syria joining the anti-Daesh coalition, the anti-ISIS coalition, it indicates that Israel and the Shah regime share common enemies in Iran and ISIS, and they share this interest of making sure that the border would be quiet. So as long and as much as the Shah regime will stabilize, will keep the Druze minority and communities safe, and will refrain from attacking Israel, I think we have good conditions to discuss security arrangements for starters and peace down the road.
Also, you mentioned in your paper or alongside the paper that these buffer zones, some would fear that when do they come long-term status? Because you mentioned earlier that at some point even these walls would go down. But when would they become a long-term status rather than a crisis response the way we're seeing it today? And what risk does that pose to Israel's strategic flexibility?
I think Israel learned some lessons from its long stay in Lebanon, as you mentioned. The years where actually the presence of the IDF on Lebanese soil not only hasn't prevented Hezbollah, but also encouraged its growth. It gave it training ground to get better, mobilization base, and so on. Time will tell, and there's no simple answer for that. I would suggest the advance and momentum of diplomacy as the good measure to indicate whether it's a long-standing stay or temporary. And the best would be temporary if the security concerns are met and the sovereign itself is attending to whatever grows on its side. Not this game of maybe we don't know, it's civilians, it's not us. You can't both. In many ways, Lebanon tried to thread the needle and have this combination of a legitimate resistance without state responsibility. It's a bit like a kosher pig, you can't have both. You need to decide whether you're a pig or kosher. So I think we're now standing in a junction of choice. You can't let terror organization run your defense and foreign policy, independent of the state, and then cry that your sovereignty is not respected.
Mhm. From from your earlier roles, you headed actually IDF teams engaging with the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, which we were mentioning earlier, and the Lebanese armed forces. And you know the structural barriers in the disarmament track for Hezbollah. What realistic incentive structure would actually motivate Hezbollah and the people of Hezbollah to agree to disarm rather than entrench?
I think the first obstacle here is Hezbollah's obsession with destroying Israel and insisting on keeping their arms for that. And that is combined with a lack of motivation or political will or enough political will of the Lebanese government to enforce it on them through political processes or otherwise. Now, we've just heard the last excuse from Lebanon is that we can't go into private properties. But we know from the war that private properties are exactly where Hezbollah put its arms, in private homes, in wadis that were declared private property. These are the same places where UNIFIL could not patrol because it's private property. So Lebanon was hiding behind, and I heard it in Nakura in the tripartite meetings. Lebanon was hiding behind, it's our law, you need a judge decree or warrant to go into a house, and people have their rights, and we can't do this, and so on. Are you trying to cloak Hezbollah's weapons, or are you trying to rid yourself and to get to the state monopoly on arms? I think that's a moment of decision. Now, you asked about incentives. There are two kind of incentive. Positively, there should be economic reconstruction, support to the Lebanese armed forces, security arrangements, and finally peace guaranteed by great powers. I think that's a great prize. And this combination would challenge Hezbollah to answer, why do we need all your resistance weapons if we have the guarantee of great powers? And Israel is quiet, peaceful with what it sees as the threat on it, content. The other are on the negative side. There should be sanctions, both personal and organizational, financial measures, direct military enforcement, but also the IDF staying in the field until this is resolved. I think that's a great incentive for Lebanon. Hezbollah would use it as an excuse, but Hezbollah's excuses are endless. In each case, they say, okay, what about Shabaa?
But why
What
don't we
about this?
remove this excuse that Hezbollah is actually using today? Like, how do we want to disarm when actually Israel is attacking, keeps attacking disregarding the ceasefire, building walls? So first, why don't we remove this justification or excuse? And how does that also, being inside of Lebanon or building walls, undermine Lebanon's government capacity to enforce the kind of disarmament Israel demands and actually is in talk with their Lebanese counterparts? With
I
the
think when
Americans counterparts, because we're seeing
yes.
American envoys are going back and forth to actually establish that kind of ceasefire. But it's been, again, used as an excuse, continuous attacks and building walls. Why don't we remove that excuse?
Look, my experience is that we're dealing with the excuse de jour. Hezbollah always has another excuse. behind the occupation, there is Rajal, there is Shaba, there is the 7 villages inside Israel. There is the overflights. There is. It is an endless fountain of, it's the Zamzam of pretexts. It never stops flowing, and it doesn't matter how many you remove. Now we're talking about the wall. This wall, as I said, I think it's an aberration. It will be corrected. I wouldn't make it too much of it. The security positions inside Lebanon will be removed when Israel is satisfied that the threat is indeed disarmed. The attacks, as every Lebanese knows, are against Hezbollah. Every strike on some guy in the municipality ends up with a yellow obituary of Hezbollah saying, yes, it's another member. Israel is not attacking Lebanon, it's attacking Hezbollah. And in this sense, this is the incentive of Hezbollah to disarm if it doesn't agree to disarm through Lebanese politics and dialogue. How long can we hear, oh, this is a matter of the national dialogue on defense, the strategic dialogue on national defense? I read it in UN report, for 15, 20 years now. Where is it? Where is this dialogue? Why isn't it moving forward?
Israel and Iran remain in a strategic tension. With your background in strategic planning, I want to ask, what triggers the next Israel-Iran escalation? Is it nuclear development, a proxy miscalculation, or something else? And since everyone is talking that there is a next phase of an Israeli war launched on Lebanon, what can you tell us about this?
About Iran, again, as I started with with Hezbollah, I am less concerned about what will be the exact spark initiating the next round. The threats on Israel from Lebanon and Gaza were diminished, although we paid a lot. The Palestinians paid more. Yemen is still, the Houthis are still a threat and a harassment. And Iran was beaten hard in June. And the militias in Iraq, I think, are deterred. Now, losing the Assad regime, they lost an ally, a front, a logistical axis. And as I said, the Shah is not playing along in the Iranian orchestra.
How effective is the current deterrence architecture at preventing a direct confrontation?
I think none of the parties is looking actively to go after the other. However, Israel will not accept further progress on the nuclear side, nor a re-establishment of the ballistic capability. And any of these can be used as a trigger. But as long as Iran is committed to Israel's destruction, and Israel is committed not to let them do so, you can assume further conflicts, although we don't know the actual spark and the date.
With some of Iran's proxies networks weakened, as you mentioned, Syria transition, Hamas decimated, what role do these proxies now play in either restraining or enabling escalation?
The Houthis found themselves suddenly very relevant on a strategic maritime line of communication. It's difficult to release yourself from this addiction of being very important by launching missiles, and I think it's also an important source of funds, because they get paid for not attacking some ships or some countries' ships and so on. They will continue so. About Hamas, we are reading that they're amassing weapons in Africa, in Yemen, elsewhere, seeking to return at some point. Hezbollah, as we see Israel attacking it, it's also the indicator that they keep trying to build themselves back. So they're down but not totally out. And I think we need to continue collectively to undermine them, to make sure that the Quds force is not immune as it used to be, and that they are not allowed to rebuild. A key to that is the counterpowers in those countries. So as we see in Syria, the change from al-Assad to al-Shara made the whole difference.
And it doesn't matter to Israel that he is a former terrorist?
It matters, and I think we need to distrust and to verify. He's still an enemy. His ideology, I don't think, has faded. Maybe the tactics have changed. We need to sleep with both eyes open, but still not give away the opportunity that opens here. So, there's this saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, he's a useful enemy. And I think we're not the only ones understanding this logic around the Middle East.
Turning to a different domain, you head the Israel-China Policy Center. Saudi Arabia is actually deepening ties with China in military hardware, drones, joint exercises present a challenge. How should Israel, and by extension the United States, MBS was here, he asked for F-35, how Israel and by extension the United States would navigate Middle Eastern partners like Saudi Arabia, who are deepening military tech ties with China without pushing them fully into Beijing camps?
Mm-hmm. I think Riyadh in MBS in particular is conducting a very sophisticated policy, tying East and West in a sense. But I wouldn't compare totally the US and China's role in his strategy. What I see in the Gulf in general is not so much deepening of military ties with China. They do some exercises, niche elements of arms, like attack UAVs that the US hasn't sold them. They went to China. But look at where the great money is. Most of the weapon systems acquired by the Gulf are American or Western and not Chinese.
But what are the strategic vulnerabilities when allies operate both US and Chinese systems? What does that mean for changing systems that it has so many vulnerabilities in terms of cybersecurity, intelligence sharing,
Yes.
and alliance cohesion?
Yes. So I think we need to understand how to coexist not military systems with Chinese military systems, but how do we coexist with our partners who rely on China in economic and technological aspects, while relying on the US on military aspects. And we heard indeed that President Trump said, yes, we will sell F-35 to Saudi Arabia, but at the same time the Pentagon is saying, well, but how do we secure the F-35 technology from China when it's in the Gulf? So they will need to find measures to protect that. China is also well known for its plethora of means and ways to acquire foreign technology, foreign advanced technology. And both America and Israel need to safeguard their technologies that they share with the Gulf partners, including Saudi Arabia. So I think the wisdom here is how to protect your technology without hampering your partnerships on the next generation. I would say the pot of gold or the highest high ground is AI and quantum. That's the great prize, the El Dorado of current technology.
Finally, let's look at the proposed International Stabilization Force, ISF, for Gaza, where composition issues, operational mandate issues, and credibility problems loom in the air. In your view, what structural design make or break a stabilization force in a contested territory like Gaza? And given Israel's strong opposition to Turkish participation and the divergence of regional actors, is a consensus-based force composition something realistic, do you think?
Well, I will generalize in a minute because you know the opening lines of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina is that all happy families are similar, but the unhappy ones are miserable each in its own way. And peacekeeping forces are a bit like that. All the successful peacekeeping forces share the keys, which is a well-defined and realistic mandate. The capabilities should be in accordance to the mandate and to the conditions. The missions should be well-defined. What do you do? What don't you do? These need to be professional and committed forces, because otherwise it turns into a look and cook mission and they do other stuff. There needs to be a political motivation of the true contributing countries. Otherwise, the local interests, such as Hamas or Hezbollah, will have the Trump side, you know. And they need the support of the relevant parties. In this sense, when you look at Sinai, the multinational force and observers established in the early 80s, which is a joint stakeholder venture of the US, Egypt, and Israel, with some contribution by others, it is a very successful force. UNIFIL is a very failing force, and its mission just blew up on October 8th. And Andof in Syria lost most of its relevance since the beginning of the civil war. So I think the key is the alignment of ends, ways, and means of the force, tweaking it, saying, okay, yeah, you need to be in the yellow region, or you need to be in the red zone, or you need to be on the borders, and you need to disarm, or you just enable disarmament, or the modalities are very important. Turkey, in this sense, is a problematic player because Israel does not believe that Turkey is committed to removing Hamas from power and disarming it. And these are the core conditions which will allow Gaza to cease to be a threat to Israel and to open the road to a peace in the future. And if you have a crooked cup in your team, how can you raid a casino? They will always be ready for you. So when Turkey comes, what does it come to do? To help Hamas or to help Gaza advance towards stability, disarmament, and peace?
You've walked through buffer zones, disarmament, Iran escalation, China tech competition, and Gaza stabilization. One final question. What's one part of Israel's current regional strategy, one blind spot or underappreciated risk that you believe most analysts in Washington, D.C. are missing right now?
I think all of those foreign security issues, from Israel outwards, need to take into account into account the domestic aspect of Israel, the need for national cohesion, the need for the rule of law, the need to harness and enforce the law in the West Bank, to stop the militias' growth, the Jewish militias' growth in the West Bank, to make sure that the armed organized crime in Israel, which mainly is responsible for deaths of our Arab civilians. All of these need to be addressed. First, the Sun Tzu said, know the enemy, know yourself. The know yourself element is very important. I think that's the center of gravity.
Asaf, Orion, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you for watching, and until next time.